the lights, I can't see anything. Okay guys, welcome to Choosing Between ASP.NET Web Forms and MVC. I am Rachel Appel. On the monitor, you can get my information in my website at rachelappel.com. I'm a software engineer out of Pennsylvania and an ASP.NET MVP, ASP Insider, and I do a crap load of ASP, right? ASP.NET. So today we're going to take a look at making some choices in user interface development. So the first thing we'll take a look at here in our introduction, a little bit about what you'll get out of this presentation if you're going to stay in it. So you want to watch it if you need to decide. If you're maybe a web forms developer or coming into the ASP.NET world and you need some facts, you need to figure out what should I do. Do I go with web forms? Do I go with MVC? Do I go with something completely different altogether? What do you need to do? And not just what you need to do. I'm not going to tell you what to do. But when you make that choice, what you're going to do on your per project basis. I'm not trying to make a religious issue out of this. So I'm not telling you guys to go and pick something and stick with it and go to that church every week. Right? Saying take a look at each project you have, and at each project, take a look at these facts I'm laying out so that you can make an educated choice yourself about what user interface presentation model you should choose. Right? So I don't want anybody to like run off on one side or the other, right? Or get into no fighting, right? So I'm sure there's some people that are pretty staunch supporters of either side right at this point, all right? And that's fine. And a lot of folks who are just trying to figure it out. And that's the folks I want to talk to, those of you who are just trying to figure it out. You have that project that you're working on, and you want to see what to do. So I want to help you decide with this talk. Sound good? Okay. So for our agenda, we'll take a look at web user interfaces, even some non-ASP.NET, non-Microsoft web user interfaces, how they all tie in together. Take a look at presentation patterns that are available today. Then a little review of web forms, a little review of MVC. Another thing this talk is not a how-to. I'm not going to teach you how to do web forms. I'm not going to teach you how to do MVC. I'm just going to lay out facts of how to go about choosing which one. So if you came to learn how to roll out an MVC app, there are other presentations here for that. That's not what I'm doing. I'm helping you choose, helping you decide. After we take a look at those two, we'll have the shared pieces. So there are many shared components of ASP.NET, and we'll take a look at what are shared between web forms and MVC. Then we'll take a look at some resources at the very end. Okay, first part with web user interfaces. All right, it's like apples and oranges and other assorted fruit, depending on what you're looking at. Way back, we had classic ASP. We have classic ASP devs here. At least 2 or 3. All right. All right. So anybody still have to maintain classic ASP? Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, that site that won't die. Yeah, that company site somewhere. Then PHP, JSP. There's some non-Microsoft presentation patterns. A couple of those, right? How about Cold Fusion, folks? A little more than I expected. I expected like 3. A little bit more. So Cold Fusion, Ruby on Rails. Rails, folks. Okay, here's the big ones. All right, I would suspect, let's see, a good 80–90% of you are web forms devs, right? Doing web forms already. And how about anybody who is already doing web forms and or MVC? Okay, so some of you have possibly made the choice already, and you're coming to see if you missed anything, or did you come just to heckle? Frank came to heckle. Yeah, someone got to do it. So, yeah, you can never trust that guy in the front row. Just, yeah, he came to heckle. Okay, so these user interfaces are available. A vast number of us have worked with classic ASP, right? That nice little, technology. So there were some issues with classic ASP, which was spaghetti code, right? That maintainability, right? Anybody like maintaining classic ASP? Right? Not a single hand. Not even the crazy dude in the back, right? Maintaining classic ASP code. These gigantic pages, right? With all kind of code, and all kind of includes, and calls to COM components. And anytime a COM component is updated, you have to restart the web server. You guys remember that fun? Right, so all that. So that was good when it first came out, because we really didn't have much before that. So classic ASP kind of brought to life a little bit of dynamic usage of the web. But quickly, we found out that there are some pain points to classic ASP. I use the word some loosely, right? So there's some pain points to classic ASP. So from classic ASP, Microsoft brought out web forms. Solves a lot of problems. One of them is that in classic ASP, how many folks would write that huge page to do the post back yourself? Right, you might do that. You would keep hidden fields or use query strings. You would essentially roll your own view state. Right? Many of us did, right? So we had that. So web forms came out. Hey, they did it for us. Right? That was great. Right? That took care of that pattern. Right? But then that caused some other issues, didn't it? Right? Again, like view state was a solution. Then view state became an issue. Right? For some of us. Right? So then view state got too large, or gasp, some people abuse it. Can you imagine, right? Just like some people abused classic ASP, right? The happy include guy, right? So the same thing, right? So they abused web forms. So, and some don't, right? And then we get MVC, which is going to help us out with no postbacks, right? And not dealing with that. So really, what happens is we make these little progressions from one to the next to the next. The last one doesn't even necessarily go away, and it doesn't make the last one bad. Right? It just means that we have more choices. Now, in .NET, our choices for user interface presentations are web forms or MVC. If we go back to classic ASP.NET, that is obviously not, or classic ASP is obviously not a .NET technology. Some of the other things web forms had given to us was a declarative way to take content and lay out your content in your web form page and then have a nice code behind. And you get a little separation. We didn't have all that goo, all that spaghetti, right? We didn't have that like we did in classic ASP. So it solved that problem too, right? It gave us that. But then again, once again, right, the abusers step out, right, and just garble everything up again. Or the code behind is what gets gunked up. How many folks have seen the gunked up code behind? Right? And then pretty soon, like, everything's in the code behind, or everything's in the content page. And it's like, hey, we're doing compiled classic ASP, right? It looks a lot like that. Right? So MVC helps us have a more granular separation. So we have these different levels of being able to work with web development and Microsoft technology. All right, so these some of our user interfaces that are available. All right, so Cold Fusion, declarative. Web forms, declarative, but we also get compiled code. MVC, scripted code and content, right? Intermixed, but a granular separation. All right, so we get a little bit of goodness out of each depending on what we're doing. More on presentation patterns. So we like patterns. We have any pattern junkies in the house? You guys like patterns? All right, pattern development, a few. All right, Rails folks, right, pattern development. Patterns are great. Patterns help us solve problems that come up over and over again. All right, think about the data access pattern, opening a connection, grabbing data, data binding, or for presentation, all right, doing different things with presentation. In web forms, content, code behind, content, code behind, all right, is the presentation pattern there for web forms. MVC allows us to split it out into a more granular level of models, views, and controllers. Some of the other presentation patterns that are available, we have monorail, Django, web objects. So MVC itself, as a pattern, has been around for some time now. It's not a new concept. It's not even a new technology as far as the pattern of dealing with it. Java's had it. Lots of others have had it. The ASP.NET MVC implementation is what's new. As a matter of fact, 1.0 was released, just yesterday, right? And I saw Phil come in. Where'd he go? There he is, right? That's the guy who released it over there, Phil Hack. All right, so we'll clap. Cool. Yay. So MVC 1.0 is now out, right? So that's the new implementation, right, is that 1.0 part. Some other patterns as well for web presentations. Model View Presenter. If you get the Smart Client Factory, you can go out to your favorite search engine and look for that. Download it from Microsoft. That will help you use that pattern out in your web apps. And the Model View Model as well. Some of these you can roll your own. You can run out on the web and download a third-party tool to help you out with it, or some third-party code or libraries. So they're available as well. Just so that you guys know about them, they are available, and there are tons of patterns. The ones we're looking at today are the MVC pattern, and I'm working with web forms as a presentation pattern as well. And then choosing what one's better for that project you're dealing with right then and there. So web forms first, since they've been around for a little bit. Right? Good things about web forms, right? Things that web forms does for us. Right? The tooling and the designer. Right? Guys like to get stuff done fast, right? Anybody not like to get stuff done fast? Right? You guys bill by the hour and stretch it out. Anybody do that one? And you guys admit that, huh? Okay. Paid by the line. That's a guy with all the stuff in the code behind, right? Paid by the line. So the tooling, the designer, right? We didn't get that in classic ASP, right? Tons of classic ASPers in here. InterDev. Did you guys just love InterDev or what? Yeah, that thing, right? It was like Notepad and color coding syntax. There, not a lot of GUI bells and whistles. Right? Visual Studio has tons of GUI bells and whistles for us. All right, so we get great tooling, great designer. So if you like to do design, if you're a developer who gets into design a lot, you like to point and click, you like to create things rapidly, we're leaning towards it. Right? Web Forms helps us with it. Right? We get to drag and drop to lay out pages. Right? So that's one of the benefits of Web Forms, particularly over classic ASP. The post-back model. Right? So that was a benefit. Right? Once again, classic ASP, we would roll it ourselves. Right? Have our hidden fields, carry those across, parse them out ourselves, and then work with those. Right? So that just does it for us. Right? Why should we keep doing that? That's a pattern. Right? Doing it over and over again. Right? Have some support there. Have some libraries that helps us out. the event as well. We have Windows developers, folks who came from Windows to .NET. A few of you guys here, I've done some older Windows dev, lots of Win32, right? So, or VB6. I know there's VB6ers out there, right? So, giggling VB6ers. So VB6, real comfy, isn't it, with the events, right? Button click, even the naming got carried over, button1_click. You're at home, right? But you're on the web now, right? It's not just WinForms, right? So we get web forms as well. Made us feel more at home, a little more comfortable, right? So if you're still one of those folks who does more Windows stuff, and you need to kind of move over to the web, you get the tooling, you get the events. It is a little bit more of a help. The learning curve is not as steep, right? It does help us out a bit. So, of course, our events and the view state and HTML forms all done up for us. Controls, right? Tons of controls out of the box, right? It goes back to tooling, right? Out of the box, there's third-party controls, a huge control ecosystem. You guys use like Infragistics or Telerik or whatever. I'm not favoring any third-party vendors. They just came to mind. All right, so you have tons of controls. You can make your own. You guys make your own controls, right? Web forms controls or control libraries. So you can extend it, right? Really easy to extend visually components and controls, right? Really quickly too, which is the other bullet point here. Rapid, right? We get it. We have the boss breathing down our neck all the time, right? Some of us have a little bit nicer way to be able to work where you get to hide a little bit once in a while. I like when I get to hide a little bit. You don't have the boss breathing down your neck. And I'm self-employed, which is kind of weird, right? So, yeah, so the rapid development is great, right? When you have to get it out, you got to get it out fast. Yes, I shouldn't talk about my boss here. It'll get weird, right? And then declarative syntax, right? That's a little lure for those Cold Fusion folks. I did quite a bit of that myself. And the first thing I said was, woo, declarative syntax. That is nice. That works great with tooling. Declarative syntax and tooling goes hand in hand. Designers makes it really great, really easy for that. And then, of course, a declarative syntax also, if you move from Windows and you move over to ASP.NET, then you move from ASP.NET, say, to WPF, right? And you kind of keep moving back and forth between Windows and web and Windows and web. It'll kind of help out a little bit. It'll be a little easier with the declarative syntax. So these are some of the big features of web forms and features that we all liked or do like. All right, depends on, not everybody likes everything about every technology, and that's fine, right? Nobody said this stuff has to be perfect. Nobody is. But we do get lots of great features from web forms. So we'll take a look at a quick web forms demo. I suspect there's not going to be anything in here that will be surprising to anybody in the room. If it is, you could stand up and scream, but I'm fairly sure you guys will be cool with this. So what I've done was I have a web forms demo for this talk, and I have an MVC demo. They're identical demos, does the same thing, and they look the same, except that one obviously is web forms, and the other is MVC. So I'll quick run the web forms demo. I'll just view it in the browser. And this particular demo, all right, so I'll bring up Phil Hack again. Phil put out a little, he called it a cheesy Northwind example, and he did it in MVC, and I said, hey, there's half of the code I could use, because I'm lazy like that. So I said, there's half the code, and then I'll build the web forms stuff, right? Because Phil wouldn't just build me a web forms one. He said, do something yourself, will you? So here's the web forms application, and it just shows the categories from good old Northwind. And if we click on a category, then I can get to a listing of the particular products for that category. If I click on edit, I can go and edit and update and all that good stuff. A little home link, a little about link. Nothing, nothing terribly complex, just a small, to the point, nice little example. That's what it looks like in web forms. If I move over to MVC and I run this, guess what it's going to look like? Kind of familiar, isn't it? Right, so it's the same thing, right? It's the same look anyway and the same feel, except we'll notice a few differences, right, in the URL. The look on the outside is the same. All right, so this way we can say for any project, right, all things being equal, we have facts for choices, right? So this way not to get tied up with different user interfaces or, different bells and whistles. Both of these samples are going to at least look the same on the outside, right? And they're very simple as far as the user interface is concerned as well. Okay? And before I continue on with the demo, I'll quick load up Zoom It, just so that you guys can get a little bit of an extra zoom level when I do need to do that. Okay, so for web forms, how would we create the web forms site? So the first thing we would do is we would add in a master page. And if I do zoom in here, right, so we can see my solution. I have my web forms Northwind, right? I have little scripts and a little styles folder, pretty common, right? Some CSS in the styles, a couple of the jQuery scripts and JavaScript under the scripts node, and then some ASPX pages. Not a lot, just a few. A default, products, edit, about, right? Stuff we might expect for a small site like this. Right? Also, I have a small entity framework data model, just with the categories and the products table. This is also not an entity framework talk, so there's nothing fancy or special in there at all, right? Just the two tables, and that's that. Web config and a master page, right? Nobody should be blinking an eye at this, right? Right? Anybody looking, going, what the heck is that? Anyone? No. Okay, you must be scared then. Sorry, what was that? Why do I have a style? I just didn't decide. I decided to not use themes because Phil didn't use themes. Because I have to do what Phil does. I don't know. Phil, why didn't you use themes with MVC? Right, so no web controls in MVC, so it wouldn't work with them? Right. So, because he was kind of asking you that. Yeah, so I kind of like CSS straight up anyway myself as a personal thing. But this is not the themes versus CSS talk. This is the choosing MVC versus web forms talk. Right? And later we could do the ORM versus stored procedures talk, or which Darren was better on Bewitched. Right? That works good too. We'll hang around for that one after the session. That kind of gets religious too. So, which Darren? Okay, so nothing like really out of line in here. Master page, nothing scary in here. Couple of scripts. We might expect a few scripts. Right? Form, div. Let me close out my Server Explorer here so we can get a little bit of a better view. And I'll do my full screen. Right. Another div with a link, a good old hyperlink. Right. Another div with more hyperlinks. Right. So that's up at the top, and my content placeholder in the footer. Really bare bones, really simple. Right. Nothing scary. This is Web Forms Dev 101. Everybody here, go ahead and yawn now. Right. Yeah. So I have my master page. Then I have products. Here we actually have to do a little work now, right, in products. Or actually what I want to do is go to default first. All right, so in default, I have an entity data source, grabs the entities and displays them. Do you guys want to guess what this is displayed in? Anyone? Oh, look, there it is, a list view. It was on the screen and nobody yelled that out. Still yawning. All right, so the list view. All right, so a data source and a list view. So you know what's going to happen? And we have that code behind, and there's going to be that little data bind in there. All right, or you don't even need it in some cases. Yeah, this one I don't even have a data bind. All right, so that's just the default. So that displays the categories. And there should be some calls that do the data bind, maybe in my products page where I pass the query string along, all right, like a product ID or a category ID, right, to grab the products for that category. All right, so when I do that, whoops, I want web forms here. When I do that in my products page, same old thing. A little bit of a jQuery function here too to spice things up and alternate the color of the rows. That's about as fancy as it gets in here. So just another grid, a grid view, and right, the code behind. Right, you know this kind of code. It might not be using EF, but you guys do this with ADO.NET, right? Connection, command, SQL data adapter, that sort of thing. Or maybe some of you are doing it with Link or some third party something. All right, these last two pieces, the data bind, right? And of course, you have way more code than this, right? You guys have like these miles of code in your code behind, right? Or code in the code behind that calls on code, and it goes forever and ever. All right, so this is the kind of stuff we do for web forms, right? We have content, we have the code behind. We have content, we have the code behind. A lot of glue in the code behind, and a lot of declarative syntax in the content page. If I go to edit, I can do the same style. I can pass across in the query string, right? I go to a particular page like edit, and I pass the ID of that particular product, right? So with that particular product, I can then fill that in another control, right? Like a form view or details view. All right, so it's all controls, right? I could drag and drop all of this, right? Very little code is really needed. I didn't do any validation or anything, but just to get some basic working, you know, web forms gives us a great way to easily build these type of applications. All right, so I can get it done. Okay, so that's a little bit on web forms, right? Nobody was surprised there, right? I didn't see any, like, horrified looks, right? Now, that's when you get somebody else's code, right? You go on to a new job. That's when you get that horrified look, when you get somebody else's code handed to you. All right, so MVC. So now we'll start to compare and contrast MVC. All right, the newer thing, all right, that some of us are using, but not all of us. So what MVC is going to do for us, it's going to give us full control over the markup. In web forms, we throw, say, a grid view on a page. And the grid view puts out a table, right? Renders a table. Yeah, I could go in there and say, hey, grid view, render it a little differently. And if I really want to spend some time, I can say inherit that grid view or make my own control based on that grid view. I can do things like that. But if I want to get that control, I really have to stretch out of the box. The control doesn't come out of the box in web forms. In MVC, you have to control everything. All right, so you say exactly what you want, exactly when you want, exactly how it gets done. You have that full control. All right, so of course, when you have to specify exactly how everything gets done, there's going to be a little more effort out of the box. Web forms, not so much effort out of the box. MVC, yes, but we get the control. All right, web forms we don't, unless we put the effort on later. All right, so that's our one thing to think about, how much control we need over the markup. The code behind, this is going to be hard for a lot. We might need some therapy over this one. No code behind. The first thing you do after you make a page and you get some elements written out, people go right for the code behind. If you're going to work with MVC, stop doing that. Bad, right? Because no code behind. We're not gunking that thing up, right? We have models, which are going to be data. We have views, which are going to be very loosely translated to the content page, right? It's going to be us mixing some script and some HTML, which I'll show you in a minute. All right, and then we have the controller, which is kind of like a policeman, right? A traffic cop. It says, take data from here, pass it to that view, right? From this model to that view, you know, take a look at this and that. All right, so that's what our controller does, just as a quick 30,000-foot overview. All right, so no code behind, right? It's not content code behind. It's model view controller. Okay. This allows us to have a fine-tuned separation of concerns. Right? Guys, ever think about when you're writing the program, you start to put some code in there, and you say, I don't know, it doesn't really belong here in the code behind. Or it doesn't belong here. Wherever you're putting it, right, it doesn't feel right. You want it split out. It's a little too tightly coupled. Right, you guys have the tight coupling problem? Right? Or you inherit code that is so married together it could never come apart. Right? It's duct taped, and you can't escape from duct tape. Right? It's a mess. All right, so separation of concerns. Right? Splitting out the fine-tuned duties of your application and loose coupling. MVC helps us with that. Of course, when we fine-tune things, once again, more effort out of the box. Web Forms really doesn't have all of that separation. It has some content, code behind separation, and you can architect and tier. Right? But this is fine-tuned, very granular. Testing, we have unit testers here. All right, so we like testing. Testing's good, right? Some shops do testing. Some shops don't. Some want to. Some won't, right? I'm not telling you to test. I'm not telling you to not, right? I'm saying if you test, test-driven development, unit testing is important to you, then MVC is probably what you want because it is geared toward a nice air for testing, right? Makes it really easy. You kind of can test web forms. It's not going to be the most pleasant thing to set up. Okay? MVC also gives us pluggable view engines. So we like pluggable stuff. There's a lot of pluggable things like provider models in ASP.NET. We do get pluggable view engines. If you don't like the view engine that comes out of the box, go get another. Right? Do what however you want stuff to be rendered, go do it. Right? Find it, download it, do open source, whatever. All right? So you get to plug it in. Okay? Of course, RESTful too, right? The URL structure and the way MVC is set up helps us to work with RESTful type services, RESTful type URLs. And of course, no postbacks, no view state at all. All right? Now that's going to be a little weird too. The no code behind, we're used to a code behind. No postbacks, we're used to a postback. No view state, we're used to the view state. All right? So if there's no postbacks and no view state, then we're going to have to do things like specify what happens when buttons are clicked, right? Because it just doesn't post back, right? How about view state? All that stuff that just gets magically carried across the wire for you in web forms. None of that. All right, so we have to start thinking a little different. They are different patterns of presentation. Doesn't mean one is better or worse, just that they're different. All right, so no postbacks, no view state, and no code behind. It's probably going to be the three big things for folks who have been doing a lot of web forms. All right, a little bit of an adjustment for us. But that's okay, just like everything that's new, it's a bit of an adjustment. All right, so as long as we know what's out there and we're educated in what choices we have, then we're okay. All right. Okay, so we'll take a look at MVC. So for some of us, we could see something a little new now. So the same demo, a little bit different. I'll break out the structure. And we don't need scripts. Do views and do the shared. Okay, and I'll zoom in a little bit. So right away, we can see that there is a controllers node. Inside of it are two controllers, one for account and one for home. Account is for the login and dealing with the login and setting up a username and that sort of thing. The home controller is some code that is used for doing some other controller type activity. All right, nothing in the models. However, we could feel free to put some data related information in there. Then we have views. There's an account node under views. In the account node are some ASPX pages. And in those ASPX pages are some mixture of script and content. And the same thing with home. Right? The account views has to do with login, username, password, etc. And the home has to do with the products and the categories. The same stuff I just showed you guys. Right? So the products listing, the categories listing. Then shared, an error page, the login control itself, the master page, config, and default is there as a placeholder. And we get the Northwind data model. So we'll take a look at the master page, since we looked at this with web forms. So in the master page, the same thing, some scripts. Right, same as in the web forms. Right? Then if I move down, the difference between this master page and the master page in web forms is that here in this div to do the login display, where I just had an anchor, right, an ASP hyperlink that produces an anchor, right, here we have what's called an HTML helper, and it says to render out, part of that user control, right, with the render partial. All right, so it puts out that ASCX. Here in the menu container div, what are called action links, right? One that points to the home, right, with the index controller. All right, so links that are created and crafted specifically. So instead of dragging and dropping, this would need to be keyed out. All right, so we have that. So it's a little different, but it ends up giving us the same user interface. Now, if we are going to craft everything specifically and say exactly, I want a link here, and I want everything very bare, right? Instead of having controls, I'm going to craft it out. When it comes to things like a grid, right, that's where we're going to really see that to the metal part of MVC. We're going to tell it specifically, you know, I need you to output a table. I need you to output rows. I need to loop through data and dump out the rows. All right, so we're going to tell it every last little bit of information that it needs to render. So we get some power from that, a lot of power out of the box. All right, web forms, we get the rapid development. We could get it done fast. With MVC, of course, if you have to type more in, it's going to take more time. All right, that's just logical. However, we are going to get that control out of the box. So we get fast out of the box, fast dev, or control. So I see a hand back here. You could just put anchors in there. However, there are a series of HTML, what are called HTML helpers, that are going to allow you to more properly craft the output that you want. This way, no matter where you're at from the master page, it could pick it up and say what controller it goes to and that sort of thing. But as you see, there is just plain old HTML here as well. So, you could do both. Okay, so we get our very close to the metal, right? Very, very fine-tuned and very, very controlled. We do get master pages, right? So that's great because everybody loves master pages, right? I'm fairly sure there's not a single ASP.NET developer, I'll go out on a limb, there's not a single ASP.NET developer that hates master pages, right? Yeah, I'm looking. Anybody raises their hand, I'm gonna make you leave, right? Everybody loves master pages. Right? Because before master pages, we had just the controls, right? That's all we had to do. So I have that, my master page, and we'll look at some more views here. We'll start right in the middle of the V of MVC. If I move to, say, products, and I take a look at products, right? So here it is, a table, right? And a for each. And when we do a for each, we're actually looking in to what's called some view data, right, in our data model, right? And just going through, and it does look similar to classic ASP with the script tags, but let's not forget in web forms, we use these tags too, and we call them binding expressions. We have the word eval in there, right? But that's inside of a grid or a control, right? So here, we're telling it specifically what to craft. With the grid, it's crafting for us, right? It's crafting the table for us. All right, so here, we're just injecting some of our own script inside with the HTML. Something we'll notice the lack of, right? And this is not on the bits that were released yesterday. This is from a little bit older of a sample as well. But you will see, even if there is a page that can be seen in Visual Studio, consider it that there is no such thing as a code behind. You will never see code in here. Or you should never see code in there. Right? I'm sure somebody's going to completely abuse that. Right? Because where there can be abuse, there is abuse. So we'll have view abuse. To our controllers. Here's where we get to these controllers, like the index or the products controller. And these controllers take a look at the data, which would be the model, and they pass it to the view. Now, something we need to kind of take a look at, how exactly it maps that up, is that when we're in classic web forms and we browse, so I move over to classic web forms here, or just web forms, I need to go to the default first. So I could pass along an ID to products. I could have typed in the query string, but I was a bit lazy. All right, here we go, products. So here's what we get. A hard page. .aspx, right, question ID 1, so the query string of an ID of 1, right? A hard page. When that HTTP request comes in on the wire, it's looking for a tangible page called products.aspx. Inside of that page, we go and grab the query string and do our thing, right? But it's looking for that page. That page must exist, right? And it does, because I have it here in my Solution Explorer. But when I go to MVC, so if I pop over to the MVC sample and I start, it's a little different here in the URL. Right? A little different. Products is about the same. It's the word products. There is no hard page, though. So there's no ASPX. And instead of an ID of 1, I just get a /1. And there's also home in here. So what it's doing is, instead of mapping to a hard page saved on a disk and served up in a file system or the web server, it's taking a look at the controller, and it's taking a look at code. It's looking at code instead of a page inside of your project. Right? So it's looking in that for a particular controller and view to work with. Right? So instead of just saying, hey, serve out a page, we're zoning into code. And that's part of the routing system for MVC. The routing system for MVC has been extended into web forms as well. All right, so we do, and dynamic data is also something that takes advantage of MVC. And there's both web forms and MVC for dynamic data. All right, so routing, nice URLs, we'll see those working for us in MVC. So the URL structure will be different right out of the box. So here my home and my products. So if I look in my home controller, right, I could see products, and I could see that particular action that's available, right? What would normally be a query string, right? And then in here, we're just looking at the entities, grabbing that as a model and returning it, right? Returning a view of those products, right, after it's been queried. So that's a little different than passing in a query string and you running off and actually having logic code, right? This is controller code, so it's not your business logic code, right? So that's a little bit with the separation of concerns, right? All too often, the where to put it comes into play, right? And we start to tangle some of our business logic, data access, and parsing the query string and figuring out what data to get to shove in the page and to query. So that's the kind of thing here where it's a little bit split out, more nice, more granular for us in MVC. So we have some controllers that act as traffic cops to send data where it needs to go. So that is another piece of the MVC puzzle that's going to help us out. Oh, let's see, I'm going to stay in here for a second. So we see our views, our controllers, and of course the model is your data. And there is a models folder that you can use and take advantage of. And you can, of course, extend it out with, end-tier development using all sorts of different data providers, et cetera, et cetera. The big deal is you get the control. You get the crafting for MVC. MVC also works great with AJAX and jQuery and things like that too. All right, so there is some AJAX and jQuery in here, the same as what's in web forms. So I can intersperse those in my views. So here in the products list, a little bit of style. All right, so a little bit of style. Could have gone in a style sheet. And a little bit of script. It's actually jQuery to be able to do the even and odd coloring on the table output. And because the grid outputs table tags by default, I can just reuse that same script in web forms, and I did. Right? Some of the shared features between web forms and MVC. The routing. The routing system is great. It doesn't matter what you're using. I've used routing in both web forms, MVC, and I do quite a bit of dynamic data. And that uses the dynamic data routes, which is drawn directly from the MVC routes. The routing system makes SEO really easy to do, right? Very SEO friendly, very nice. All right, so routing is an excellent shared feature. Something else that I didn't put on the bullets here, but if we think about it, these are both ASP.NET technologies. They're built on the ASP.NET platform. All right, so just two different ways of doing the UI. All right, so it's not like we're running off with some non-ASP.NET technology or, that we have to take one side or the other. right? We get a lot of benefits out of both and a lot of shared stuff in both, as we see here on the slide. Caching, we like caching. Caching is up there with master pages, isn't it? Caching can hide a lot of sins, right? Yeah, you guys have that DBA who's, well, you'd rather a different DBA, just put it that way, right? So you have to cache the data because, I won't go into detail about that because he's probably here, right? So, that or she, right? So caching hides a lot of sins. Don't worry, output caching, the cache API works in both, right? Great, works in both. Now, the implementation might be a little different. You may have to type something out where you could drag and drop here or declare. But hey, it's still shared features, still the same exact base code somewhere. The profiles and membership, right? So those are some very handy things. Many of us use profiles and membership and forms authentication, right? We like forms. That's a great way to be able to do things. So profile and membership are shared features. Some of the application management as well, and some session management. You still get great things like cookies, right? Nice handy little things, and app data. Not the, I don't mean the app data folder, but application data, right? So application variables, those sorts of things, right? So you get some sort of state management. Configuration as well, right? Web config, right? So web config is a great thing, right? Lets us be able to go in there and mark stuff up and, give connection strings and all kind of pieces of information and set up also pieces of information for the web server. Ajax, jQuery. We have Ajax folks here, jQuery folks. So you guys have not been wooed by Silverlight. We're staying with some script for a while. Come on. Yeah, we want script. Yes. So, because jQuery makes JavaScript so much less painful, right? So much better. Right, and Ajax, the great Ajax libraries that we have, especially if you guys look at the Ajax previews on CodePlex, you don't even need ASP.NET, right? You can just go with a .htm, right? So it's great stuff, and it works everywhere, right? It works in web forms, works in MVC, works all over the place. So you get all that good scripty goodness, no matter which way you go. Localization, we have multilingual developers here, right? Global developers, right? We got a globetrot, right? Got to make apps work for everybody, right? So localization is important and it's shared, right? We get all of the culture info, all of that good stuff, all of those libraries. And of course, as you see, master and content pages, because I think without master pages, a whole lot of devs wouldn't, we wouldn't like either web forms or MVC. We'd all be doing Cold Fusion or something. So master pages, of course, and content pages on both, right? So shared and very, very familiar to us. If you're already doing web forms, the master pages and MVC are not a huge stretch at all, right? If you're new to MVC. Yeah. So some things to think about when you make your choice. All right, so we have web forms and MVC. All right, so web forms, of course, established, mature, right, hanging around and not going away. A lot of folks come up and ask me after talks, I think web forms is going away. I'm going to panic and do Silverlight and MVC. Go ahead. They're not going away, though. But if you like to panic, be my guest, right? So web forms, hanging around for a while, gives us lots of great benefits like the design time support, the rapid development. If we don't need to really do hardcore control over every little piece of output, if a master page and some content is what we need, right, and a little bit of code and a regular end-tier app, web forms are great. MVC is more a DIY deal, or if you have a shop that does testing, You need SOC to be promoted heavily, and you need complete and utter control and extensibility out of the box, right? Then MVC is something that you're going to work with. All right, so you can see control and effort, right, with the out-of-the-box deal, right? As we go, right, more toward the left, you know, the finer control, the more effort that we need to put in out of the box. We can get a lot of these things done with web forms, right, but sometimes we have to jiggle it around and jump through a few hoops and do a few extra things. I'm talking out of the box, right? So we could do anything to any technology not out of the box to make it identical to the other one, right? But out of the box, a little more control, but a little more effort for MVC, right? A little easier, a little less effort, a little faster for web forms. And of course, right smack in the middle, we get great sets of shared features. And moving forward, both sets of technologies will be enhanced, right? They'll be cared for. We have teams working on them. When I say we, I mean Microsoft, because I don't own Microsoft. All right, so teams working on them with some great staff to go and keep adding great features. Some things to note also for Web Forms 4 is that we are going to have some more control over the output. It's not the fine-tuned control that you see in the examples here for MVC, but it is control, a little bit more than you get. Trimming down the view state, dealing with the IDs that are generated, and that sort of thing. So it is getting a little bit better as well if those are your pain points in dealing with web forms. And if they are, you still get web forms, but you might also consider MVC. So it's a personal choice. Right? For some, it's a religious choice, right? And then once again, I'm not telling you to go out and choose one. I'm not telling you what to choose. I'm not telling you when you choose that you have to choose one and you have to stick with that for every project. That's just ridiculous. That is religious. I'm saying take a look at each project and think of all these things that we've discussed in here today. And on each project, you have a project-by-project scenario to meet the business needs and all of the factors that come into play when you create your app. So some of those things, if you're doing maybe an intranet app, probably need to get that done a little quicker. Probably don't need the fine-tuned control. Right? It's behind the firewall. It's for your regular employees. Web forms might be great, right? Just as an off the top. If it's an internet app, might be great as MVC, because you might need to control everything for every browser, right? And you don't get control over that, and it's a little harder to do that in web forms. If you have a pattern shop, you guys like patterns, right? MVC might be your deal. Right? You might take a gradual progression of dealing with web forms, moving over to MVC, and doing both, right? Depending on what the project is. Right, so a gradual progression. You can use them together. So that's a great thing too, right? With the routing system particularly, makes it really easy. You do not have to have just one or just the other. Right, so really, if you just can't choose, right? If you're that person that goes into the supermarket and you fall apart when you look at all the potato chips, right? You just can't choose. Well, use them together. Right? You can do that. There's lots of rad controls for web forms. Right? If you have a lot of third-party controls invested in already, or a lot of controls that you've built in-house, you probably don't want to just dump them and run off with MVC. Because you can't just dump stuff and run off with some other technology. Right? It's very rare we can just throw out apps and then start fresh. It's cool when we can, but rarely does that happen. All right, so these are some of the things we would think about, right, when we want to make our choice for that particular project. So a whole bunch of resources here. A lot of these folks are on the teams, right? The ASP.NET site, mostly Lucid is Scott Galloway's site. He's the web forms guy. Hack.com is Phil's site, right? He's the MVC guy. right? And the rest of them do at least one, the other, or both. All right, so a whole bunch of resources. And I'm also going to post these on my blog at rachelappel.com. I also post a lot about web forms and post a little bit about MVC as well, and more about dynamic data, which does both. So there's some of our resources. Also, you guys have evaluations. Please be sure to fill out the evaluations for the session. And if you're going to low score it, please put down comments as to how and why I had so terribly and egregiously offended you. Okay? And if you guys have questions, come up. Other than that, we're done. Thank you. Yeah, microphone. I think they're working.
Okay. Can you create XHTML compliant code using web forms?
XHTML compliant code with web forms.
Yes.
You can.
So it's not a risk if you, because I know a lot of people have moved to MVC, so they have that fine-grained control, so they know that their sites are XHTML, but you can use web forms and end up creating XHTML compliant.
Right. In Visual Studio 2, you get the little DTD, the doc type pieces. You could pick out the XHTML, and it'll give you some of the errors and warnings for that. So that'll help. It'll help. Now, it might not be all that out of the box easy, right?
My question is just whether MVC supports views that aren't outputting HTML. So, for example, in one of my applications, I use ASPX with code behind to return JavaScript, dynamic JavaScript. And will MVC be able to do that?
Okay, I heard the last half where you said you use JavaScript in your ASPX pages, but I did not hear the first half of what you said.
Oh, sorry. So I was saying in one of my apps, I use an ASPX page that actually returns JavaScript instead of HTML.
Okay.
So it's dynamically generated JavaScript. I'm
Sure.
just wondering if MVC will support that, like a view that returns JavaScript and not HTML?
A view that returns JavaScript, if your view is going to usually take data from your model, right? Your controller is going to take model data and pass it to the view. What you could do for dynamically generated JavaScript is you can do it. All of the details you might want to check with Phil over there on it.
Okay.
Because I'm going to tell you not to put too much code in the controller. What you might do is move some of that out, right? Separate your concerns out to like a user interface logic layer that would actually generate that JavaScript and then return that. Okay. And then you shouldn't have too much of a problem with that.
Okay. Thank you.
Sound about right? Yeah, okay. Yeah? Oh, okay. Thanks. I didn't know you know Brian. We're ASP Insiders together. Yeah.
So web forms has great support for input validation.
Yeah.
So in MVC, is it kind of just do it yourself on that too? You have to do both JavaScript validation on the client side, then build that into the controller as well, instead of having the nice one place to do it all?
Right. You're just not going to drag and drop the validation controls. You're going to have your own JavaScript or jQuery, and use that for your client-side validation. And no matter if you're using web forms or MVC, on the server side, you need to revalidate that data for security purposes, right? To scrub your data to make sure that it's clean, right? And not just valid from the user's perspective.
Okay. And is there anything built in on the controller side that helps with the validation? Like there's the page.isValid you use for web forms. Is there anything like that on the MVC side that's just kind of a catch-all, or is it just build it yourself there too?
Right, you're just going to go through and build things yourself. Because we're going to go after stuff like page.isPostback and isValid, and those are based on the control models in the postback model, right? So that's not available in MVC.
All right. Thank you.
I just wanted, a lot of people, jQuery came up quite a bit, and we're going to do a jQuery meetup at 5:30 in Third Place area. So if you're interested in jQuery, swing by.
Cool. Oh, wait a minute. Let's see. I could probably Twitter that. Where's that at?
Third Place.
Third Place. 5:30. Uh-oh. Are we bringing Twitter down? It's all, taking its time in here. All right, jQuery meetup at 5:30 at third place. Yeah, Twitter's not coming up. We got. That sounds good. I don't know. T23. Okay. I guess, could we turn off the mic? I don't think there's any more questions. Okay, well.